We do have a live guest joining us via Zoom. It is Ryan Pacyga. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Repeat guest here on News Now from Fox, and we just wanted to talk to you about the latest in the Derek Chauvin trial. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us yet again. So we kind of have a game plan here. We have a fully seated jury in the Derek Chauvin trial. 15 jurors, but only 14 will hear the case. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, the court administration here in Minnesota has been very tight on the COVID issues. We haven't had a lot of COVID trials. And for those that we do, given the spacing concerns that have to be abided by in the courthouses and in the courtrooms, it's actually the court administrator directing that they can only fit 14 jurors into the room with the safety protocols for COVID. And they put that through to our chief judge, who then passed that along to the judge that's handling the trial, Judge Cahill.
Mr. Pacyga, I remember we were actually speaking with you last time when we unfortunately lost our internet connection here, and you were providing some very good insight. You were saying this is going to be the first televised trial in Minnesota ever?
That's correct. Until a few years ago, we had a rule with no cameras whatsoever in the courtroom, and then they made a limited rule to allow only cameras for sentencing hearings if a defendant had pled guilty or been found guilty. There's been a push. I've been leading that push as long as many other lawyers have, to get more cameras in the courtroom, because I think transparency into the whole process is good for the public understanding how these processes really work and looking what due process looks like.
Do you think it's a good idea for the general public to know some facts about these jurors, even though we may never know their real identities? Because, of course, once the trial's all said and done, they will decide whether or not they want to speak to the media. But when we hear details such as a white man in his 20s who is married and works as an accountant, does that sway the public opinion about these jurors at all?
It could sway the public opinion. I mean, I think it's important for the public to see what a cross-section of the community really looks like, and people's ideas about what a fair jury and a fair process looks like includes things like a multicultural and a diverse jury, both in terms of economic statuses, age, color, you name it. So this is good for the public to see these sorts of things. And, whether or not that'll actually taint the public view on a fair trial, or whether that will compromise jurors, this is supposed to be a public process. In most situations, jurors are made public, and that's so we have that level of accountability for decisions and a transparent process. If we cross-reference that from what we see as alarming situations in trials in some third world countries, for example, where the defendant is put in a cage, there's no jury, there's only a judge, and those proceedings are private the whole time, you wonder about the fairness of that process. So the more information we let out about this situation, the more comfortable the public ought to be that indeed these processes are supposed to be fair and transparent.
One thing I wanted to ask you this morning, now that we have a fully seated jury, is there going to be any activity in the courtroom today, tomorrow, Friday, or are we literally just waiting until Monday?
If there's any activity in the courtroom, it's only going to be with the judge and lawyers in chambers, or maybe even over the phone. It depends. There are still going to be some motions in limine dealt with, and those are arguments by the lawyers about which pieces of evidence can or can't come in. We've already seen a lot of that going on before the jury's been brought in each day, and that will continue on. The other big battle that's going to be going on behind the scenes right now is the language in the jury instructions, as this is done outside of the view of the jury as well. So jurors are given a written set of instructions that the judge reads to them right before they begin their deliberations after closing arguments. And then again, they take those written instructions back with them into the jury room to guide their deliberations. There's going to be a battle about what language is appropriate in terms of, I think, the elements of this third-degree depraved mind murder that there's been this big battle about in Minnesota. And second of all, I think the other big battleground on jury instructions will be this affirmative defense that police officers are afforded in Minnesota to use reasonable force in some situations. Those are not, although we have some stock language from that, from case to case, there's battles about how to tweak that language. And this is a big chess match going on because the jury sometimes will hang their entire decision on one word in some of these jury instructions. So you can bet your bottom dollar that the lawyers are battling and trying to get the most favorable language in these jury instructions for their version of the case.
Now, Chauvin is charged with third-degree murder, second-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in the death of George Floyd from last May. And Judge Cahill actually reinstated that third-degree murder charge against Chauvin during the first week of trial. As a criminal defense attorney, what is going to be his lawyer's best defense?
I think reasonable doubt based upon the disagreement in some of the medical reports. It's going to be a battle of the experts, I think, is the biggest thing. And that's going to depend on how convincing these experts are testifying to the jury and whether the defense can get the experts to concede that perhaps it was the cause of death with the pressure on the neck, but perhaps it was the toxicity and underlying medical issues as well. I think that's where the defense has to try to go in the case. They can use the police officers' training and what was a permissible law enforcement move at the time to put a knee on the neck. Minneapolis has since retracted that as officers are no longer able to do that. But at the time of this situation, for whatever reason, Minneapolis had still licensed that type of restraint hold. So the defense is going to be reasonable use of force by law enforcement, training and experience for the officer, and then perhaps reasonable doubt as to the cause of death in this case.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell me that I may have forgotten to ask?
What you're really going to get on here is we're going to have to see if Chauvin testifies in this trial. I think that could be a game changer either way. The adage is typically you don't put your defendant on the stand unless you absolutely have to, because even if they're telling the truth, if a jury doesn't like them or if they're not a convincing person or if they just don't communicate well, you could lose a case not by what the facts are, but rather whether the jury believes your defendant, and they kind of throw out the idea of the presumption of innocence and burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So that'll be an 11th hour decision for the defense. They're going to see how the rest of the trial goes. And only if they think they need to put Chauvin on the stand at the end of it will they do that.
Judge Cahill has kind of said he's expecting this trial to be about a month long. Once it is in the jury's hands, how long do you think it might be until we have a verdict?
You never know. I've had trials that have gone 6 weeks long and had a jury out for 2 days. I've had a month trial and had a jury out a half hour. I've had a week-long trial and had a jury out for 4 or 5 days. So it's really hard to tell. I mean, the other thing the defense might be doing here is trying to get a divided jury and get a mistrial out of this, because you have to have all 12 jurors unanimously find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt for a conviction. Even 11-1 doesn't count. So if the defense can divide that jury a little bit and keep them from being able to disagree, that could go on quite a while. And I would anticipate the judge would send them back and tell them keep deliberating. That's normal. But at some point, if they can't agree, the judge has to declare a mistrial.
Would you say that anybody who's in Minneapolis or in Minnesota or essentially in law is keeping a very close eye on this case?
Yeah, a lot of people are watching it. We've never seen anything like this. My office is directly across the street from the Hennepin County Courthouse. We've got National Guard members perched on top with assault rifles like snipers. I mean, I walked by there yesterday and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I've never seen this. And this looks like what I would figure a trial in another country might look like, where a court is just under lockdown. It's just, everybody's looking at this thing, and I feel like the city, to a degree, is sitting on a powder keg, because we had these riots after this happened, and depending on how this trial goes, we don't know what's going to happen again. So people are paying attention.
All right, Mr. Pacyga, thank you for joining us yet again here this morning on News Now from Fox.
Happy to help.
Most of you are going to see a 2-minute commercial break. More News Now from Fox is next.